Hello and welcome to my video blog today. Today is Paul Chek's coffee and espresso tips. Oh, can you imagine me telling you tips for how to use coffee and espresso? Hey, well, when you're a holistic health practitioner, you got to know something about almost everything, and coffee is a common problem I have to deal with in people's lives. So today I want to share some tips with you. This is a three-part series. First, I'm just going to give you a general overview. Then I'm going to talk to you about how to make it. And then I'm going to talk to you about how to get off of it. How's that for a combo of events? Okay, there are some benefits to coffee. We'll start off with the good stuff, the positive. 1, it aids athletic performance. Most people think it's just the caffeine. But if you study Illy, the man who is the producer of Illy Coffee and probably did more research on coffee and coffee making than anybody in the world, he has a whole book on it, a very comprehensive scientific book. He explains, as do others, that there's many other amino acids that are stimulatory to the neurohormonal axis, or nervous system and hormonal system as a working system. And so it's not just the caffeine. There are amino acids that are stimulatory to the body in there. So it can be very beneficial to athletic performance, but for reasons I'll describe later, it does come at a cost, and one must be very careful using it. 2, as most of us are aware, it has a bowel clearing effect. There's some positives and there's some negatives to that, which I'll talk about shortly. So it can be used as an effective aid to alleviate constipation, clear the bowels, and it can also be used to clear the bowels for healing purposes or medicinal purposes, not just as in other words, therapists use it for coffee enemas and things like that. There's more to it than just drinking coffee to make yourself poop. Okay? It aids mental performance, and I love it. I tell you what, when you do a lot of mental work like me, writing constantly, videos, slideshows, articles, and the list goes on, sometimes the old black box gets a little tired of output, and a damn good espresso can really put some wind in your sails. But again, it's a dirty little hook. You got to be careful not to get addicted to it, or the next thing you know, you can't think straight unless you have coffee. So, catch-22 there. Coffee is very, very well liked for the fact that it aids mental performance by linearizing thought. Rudolf Steiner, in his teachings, explains that coffee has the effect, as does tobacco, interestingly, of bringing the thoughts more in line. It's often referred to as the writer's drug because it allows you to take a number of ideas and bring them into a sequence. I believe that's probably because of its elevating cortisol levels stimulates the left brain. And the left brain helps with autobiographical sequences or timeline sequences or linearizing things. As a side note, herbal teas, particularly those made from flowers, have the opposite effect. So if you have a flower tea, a tea based from flowers, even if it's got a little bit of caffeine in it, it has an opening effect on the mind, allowing you to scan your brain and your universe for many ideas. So where coffee linearizes, many of the flowered teas have an opening effect. Most people are very familiar with the opening effect of marijuana, but you don't have to go to that extreme. For example, it might not be appropriate for you to smoke a joint while you're trying to get some ideas for your new article at work, but some nice herbal teas could be very beneficial. So, it also has beneficial nutrients. It's used by a number of natural cancer treatment centers and physicians for the beneficial nutrients, antioxidants, and a variety of micronutrients. But like a lot of things, people read one article that there's 1 or 2 little beneficial nutrients and something used as an excuse to go crazy with it. So keep that into context. There's beneficial nutrients, but there's also some challenges I'm going to explain. We want to keep everything in balance. One of the things I learned from Dr. Timmons, who I learned functional medicine from years ago, is that the doctors that use coffee in the treatment of cancer often want you to consume it quickly because the oxidization rate of the nutrients in the coffee turns out to be quite high, according to what Dr. Timmons shared with me. So what he was saying is coffee should always be freshly made, should not sit around, it should be freshly ground, it should not be pre-ground. So fresh beans, freshly ground, freshly made, and drank quickly. It shouldn't be hanging around, sip here, sip there. Doesn't mean you got to slam it like alcohol, but you should consume it quickly. Dr. Timmons told me it should be consumed within 10 minutes of making it for optimum nutrient absorption and performance. It's also very good for time zone shifting, and I'm a master of the time zone. Oh my God, 20 years on airplanes. Oh, woo! So you can use coffee by drinking a little coffee or espresso when the sun rises or when you first get up in the morning of the new location you're at. It can help shift the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, or the timekeeper, into the zone that you're in and give you a quicker adaptation process. Again, it does help, but if it becomes an addiction, it creates more problems than good. So there's some of the many benefits. If I wanted to do an exhausted list of coffee benefits, I could probably write a book on it, but we want to just keep it short and sweet so you understand there's benefits and there's things to be concerned about. Let's look at the caution list. 1, coffee is a stimulant. Coffee, espresso, it's a stimulant. Again, it's not just the caffeine, there's amino acids in there. Because it's a stimulant, it's highly linked to adrenal stress. How often do I see coffee and adrenal stress go together? Very, very regularly. Thousands of cases. More than I can even count. So know that with increased coffee consumption, usually you have increased stress on the adrenal glands and all the things that go with it, which are many. Coffee's highly addictive. 1 day on coffee, I've tested this many times, not only with myself, but with many people. 1 day on coffee, 1 cup of coffee, and you'll have withdrawal symptoms the next day, most people. And coffee is not an easy one to get off of. On 1 cup of coffee a day, I've seen people vomit, have stomach cramps, serious headaches, and not be able to move for an entire day off of 1 cup. So be careful. Coffee is often toxic. Coffee is one of the most heavily sprayed crops in the world. Much of it's grown in third world countries where they have limited to no ban or control of dangerous pesticides. And I've done research into this. Many of the pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, or dangerous chemicals that are illegal in the U.S. are sold to, even given to third world countries to addict them to the use of the chemicals, and it is sprayed all over coffee. So, very much like grains, if you're going to drink coffee, you better go organic, or you may be doing yourself a lot of long-term damage and cause symptoms that are very hard to evaluate. Coffee has a diuretic effect. It's not, as often people think, it's not the caffeine. According to the research I did, caffeine is not a diuretic. But the coffee itself has a diuretic effect on the body because, 1, it irritates the entire intestinal tract, causes the body to use a lot of fluids to try to push it out of the body. So it does have a drying effect on the body, and a quite significant drying effect. Can result in constipation in absence of coffee or espresso. So what happens if a person, and I've seen this with lots of athletes, especially distance running athletes, triathletes, biathletes, those types, if they get used to using coffee regularly, like before they run, to make themselves go to the toilet to clear the bowels before the athletic effort, and then they don't have the coffee, they can actually start getting constipated because the body starts becoming dependent upon that level of stimulation to clean itself out. So be careful there. Very stressful to females. Very stressful to females in general. I hate to say that, girls, but your bodies do not do well with coffee. A woman's body is designed to carry two. Therefore, the tolerances in her hormonal system are much, much more tightly regulated. So if a woman's pre- or postmenopausal or suffers from menstrual irregularity, amenorrhea, dysmenorrhea, any problem with the menstrual cycle or heavy periods, cramps, painful periods that are above and beyond a normal healthy woman, which should be literally minimal to no pain. If you study the history of those things, you'll see that it's not normal for women to be in a lot of pain. So to the degree that a woman's got menstrual irregularities of any kind, or she's pre-menopausal, menopausal, or postmenopausal, coffee is a death sentence. It overworks the adrenal glands, and the adrenal glands turn out to be a backup system for the ovaries. So once a woman's premenopausal and menopausal, she relies much more heavily on her adrenal glands for the production of key hormones that her ovaries are no longer able to manufacture. So by drinking coffee, you disable the woman's backup system, and it can lead to lots of physical, mental, and emotional complications. Okay? I alluded to that earlier, as a drying effect, it leads to overheating the body. So when you dry the body out and you overstimulate or wind the body up through sympathetic activity, heart rate goes up, respiratory rate goes up, you go into a fight or flight reaction, it leads to overheating of the body. As a matter of fact, if you give some coffee to someone who's not drank it before, usually within a minute, they often start to sweat. So there's an example of the sympathetic excitation leading to elevated metabolism, leading to elevated body heat, which comes with many problems I don't have time to explain. Slows healing. So if your body, remember, healing is a yin function, and moistening the body is a yin function. So something that dries and speeds the body actually has the opposite effect on healing. In other words, it slows healing down. Okay? It leads to problems in connective tissue, causing dehydration and binding of connective tissue. I'm a clinical massage therapist, a neuromuscular therapist, a sports massage therapist. I've studied with the best, and I've been practicing clinical massage therapy and all types of massage therapy since January 1988. So I have about 30 years of experience working with soft tissue and soft tissue injuries. And I can tell you for sure, I can practically tell you who drinks coffee without even knowing anything but touching their bodies. It causes connective tissues to bind and to adhere together. And in athletes, it leads to all sorts of problems with the synchronicity or the timing of joint movements because of the fascial binding that is created. Immune stress. If you drink coffee regularly, whether it be coffee or espresso, you're going to get elevated glucocorticoids or stress hormones. If you have chronically elevated cortisol, if you look at the work done by Robert Sapolsky, there's a great National Geographic documentary featuring Robert Sapolsky, the author of Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Excellent book to read. He shows chronic elevation of glucocorticoids leads to immune suppression, or maybe even fatigue, if you will, but suppression is probably a better word. When you have immune suppression and you're drinking coffee, you run into problems because coffee, my friends, is a major fungal feeder. Also, when you have immune suppression, you open the door wide for parasite infection. In my Healing Fungal and Parasite Infections, the Absolute Essentials DVD set, 4 DVDs, I go into great detail of all the things you need to know, but know that coffee is a major fungal feeder and it is a major stressor of the immune system if used chronically, so you can set yourself up wide for fungal and parasite infections, which can cause you more problems than you ever want to even have to deal with. But many of you watching right now, as a matter of fact, about 90% of you have a fungal and a parasite infection. So look into that program at the C.H.E.K Institute website and learn more. Sexual performance. Well, if your sexual performance is lacking, men, in other words, you're not able to hold an erection long enough to satisfy your girl or your lover, or if you're a woman, your sex drive is diminishing, your interest in sex is diminishing. Those are classic reactions to coffee consumption. Couple of tips for you. The parasympathetic nervous system is what moistens a woman and keeps her healthy inside and gives her those nice vaginal contractions. Just like it causes peristalsis, the parasympathetic system causes peristalsis, contracting the smooth muscle of the body. When a woman gets excited during sexual pleasure, those contractions come by way of the parasympathetic system. As a woman becomes too sympathetically dominant, or a man becomes too sympathetically dominant, her inner system weakens. So the same thing that happens to a woman happens to a man, but just differently. In a male, the parasympathetic system is responsible for maintaining the erection, keeping it up, keeping the blood in the erection, and the sympathetic system is responsible for ejaculation. So if you get too much coffee in you, or too much sympathetic stimulation, the sympathetic system overrides or pushes back too hard on the parasympathetic system, meaning the man can't maintain an erection, and the sympathetic system being overstimulated causes the body to want to ejaculate very quickly. So you get two things, guys, that women probably aren't too excited about if they like making love, and most of them do. So if you're lacking performance, can't keep it up, or you're prematurely ejaculating and you're drinking coffee, you better watch part 3 of this series where I talk about how to get off of it, because it ain't doing you no good. And that's not a good thing, to feel that insecurity of not being a man in bed, baby. We don't want you going out there and buying a penis enlarger all over there's like millions of emails out there right now. Maybe you can get one cheap, but I don't think that's the way to go. Okay? 7, the Indians referred to coffee as empty fire. Why? Because it speeds up your metabolism, excites the system, but relative to the amount of extra work it causes inside your physiology, it delivers almost no nutritional value, relatively speaking. In other words, there's lots of things you could eat, such as berries are stimulatory to the adrenal system and can be exciting, but they carry a lot of nutrition. So if you want to get a good high, eat something natural like some berries as an example, and you won't get that negative empty fire effect. The reason they call it empty fire is because there's no adequate nutrition to compensate for what the body must devote to the response triggered by the stimulatory effect of the coffee. So I've shared a few neat things about coffee. I've given you some warning and some education about coffee in a few short minutes. In my next video clip, I will invite you into my kitchen where I show you my beautiful handmade Italian espresso machine and a matching grinder, and I'll show you some of the tricks I use to make badass espresso. I'll see you then.